All right. Thank you for joining us today for the RGEM Speaker Series. I am Lindsay Beecham with the University of Idaho Water Resources Research Institute, or IWRI, in Coeur d'Alene. The RGEM Coeur d'Alene Lake Collaborative is a team of professionals working to preserve lake health and protect water quality by promoting community awareness of local issues through education, outreach, and stewardship. We have representatives from the University of Idaho Water Resources Research Institute, the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, the Idaho Department of Environmental Equality, Kootenai County, the Basin Environmental Improvement Project Commission, Kootenai Environmental Alliance, and the Coeur d'Alene Regional Chamber. In addition to these online speaker series, we have guest author water-related articles in the Coeur d'Alene Press every other Sunday. You can find the archives of past presentations and articles on our website, uidaho.edu/rgem. Our speaker today is Doug Evans. Doug is a natural resources specialist with the Bureau of Land Management, where he has dedicated 25 years to restoration work. His expertise focuses on managing and restoring natural habitats, particularly in wetlands and riparian areas. You can ask questions in the chat at any time. We'll save them for the end. Questions will be prioritized by relevance to the topic at hand. And if we run out of time, feel free to email your questions to iwiri@uidaho.edu, and we will follow up with you as soon as we're available. And with that, Doug, when you want to take it from there?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share about the Cougar Bay Restoration Project. And thank you to all the supporters of RGEM and Lake Coeur d'Alene. And that includes all of you here today. So with that, let's see, okay, there we go. So the Cougar Bay Restoration, Cougar Bay Wetland Restoration. In the picture here, the aerial view, you'll see the kind of the northwest corner of Lake Coeur d'Alene City on the top right, and that's Cougar Bay, just on the top left there. Spokane River on the north end of the lake emptying, and you'll see Highway 95 kind of traversing the edge of Cougar Bay and then out into the wetland that we'll be talking about today. So first we'll do a little background and history of the bay and the wetland. So this is a historical photo of the old log yards that were out in the bay that stored the logs from across the lake that were destined for the mills in the Spokane River. Some of the other important historical things that happened there were early farming and modifications of the wetland. So they were extensively drained to try and make them suitable for agriculture. You know, we've got some reports of there was corn production there at one time, but more recently it was probably mostly hay production, probably some grazing as well. So the wetlands were dried out. The creek was channelized, ditched to try and, you know, make it a little more suitable for agricultural uses. So this is a view of the project area outlined in orange there. So one of the other major modifications of the wetland was when in the early 1980s, Highway 95 was rerouted from the old Cougar Gulch Road, which was on the west side of the wetland, and now it was changed to basically bisect the wetland. Big berm kind of altered all the hydrology. You can see where Cougar Creek comes under the highway in the bottom left of the photo, and then follows that blue line. And then where there's a green line going in, that was kind of the old channel, but it essentially got filled in at the end of the green line, and then the Cougar Creek was rerouted into a ditch that went up and then followed the edge of the highway all the way down to the lake. So the wetlands are primarily fed by Cougar Creek. It's a perennial stream that flows through the parcel, drains about a 16 square mile watershed. And like I said, pretty much carries all of the creek right through that ditch. Not much of it gets out into the wetland, except during the really high flows. So there's also a trail system out there. And if any of you have been out there hiking, you've probably seen this, one of the bits of evidence of the alteration of the wetland. This old dozer is right on the edge of the wetland as the hill rises up. So the timeline of how BLM became involved in what was historically all private property. So in 1998, the Nature Conservancy recognized the ecological importance of the property and acquired 88 acres of the land from a local timber company. Following that, in 2003, the BLM acquired some adjacent property from John C. Pointner, who lived in that area, and created the John C. Pointner Memorial Wildlife Sanctuary. The trail system that was originally just on the Nature Conservancy portion was extended out onto the BLM portion as well in 2013 to 2015. And then BLM finalized the purchase of the original 88 acres from the Nature Conservancy in 2021 through use of the Land Water Conservation Fund. So if you're familiar with the Land Water Conservation Fund, or if you're not familiar, it was established by Congress in 1964 to fulfill a commitment to safeguard natural areas, water resources, cultural heritage, and to provide recreation opportunities to all Americans. And it's been a great resource for acquiring high-value public land. So here's another overview of the area. The outlined in orange is the Nature Conservancy piece that was then acquired by BLM. The yellow is the John C. Pointner Wildlife Sanctuary, also BLM. So the project area is all within the Nature Conservancy, the old Nature Conservancy piece. So now BLM has basically an abandoned farm field with a highway running through the middle of it where a healthy wetland should be. So you can see this is the channel following Highway 95 on the left, project area on the right. You can see a few willows and alder on the top right there, and there's kind of cattails off in the distance, but it's pretty much all reed canary grass. That's a pretty low value wetland. The water doesn't get out of the ditch very often, except at really high flows or when the lake backs up that high. It's a really disrupted hydraulic system with very little vegetative diversity, not that much habitat, not that much sediment trapping. The water is just shunted straight into the lake. It doesn't get out into floodplains, and not much to intercept or filter pollutants from upstream activities. So this is a little later in the season where the reed canary grass is getting a little higher. But as you can see, the wetland is pretty much dominated by reed canary grass, which is an introduced non-native grass. So European cultivars of reed canary grass were introduced and planted in Oregon as pasture grass and erosion control in the early 1900s. And these European cultivars were bred for high growth rates and adaptability to a range of environmental conditions to help control erosion, basically. So there were also some native canary grass in the Pacific Northwest, but these European cultivars, these aggressive growing European cultivars are really now what's abundant and invasive in many wetlands in the Pacific Northwest. So reed canary grass is really difficult to remove. I mean, it's a big, tall grass, not quite big enough to hide a full-grown moose, but it's it chokes out basically everything else. It's prolific seed production, has aggressive underground rhizomatous root system that can create an up to 18-inch thick sod layer that just chokes out all the competing vegetation around it. Seed banks are also really high because they can create or have about 600 seed heads per seed. So you end up with a monoculture of reed canary grass with really very low vegetative diversity. So again, this is our starting point. Pretty rough shape, but a lot of room for improvement. So we set some goals. We wanted to restore wetland process and function, obviously including plant diversity and hydrology to these uncontaminated but degraded wetlands. We want to protect and preserve the wetlands and restore habitat function and processes in the stream and riparian areas. We wanted to improve the water quality from Cougar Creek flowing into Lake Coeur and preserve and restore the lake margin and habitats that were fairly intact to fish, waterfowl, and other aquatic species. So how we were going to do this is mainly to increase water retention time in the wetland by raising the water table, slowing the water down, spreading it out across the wetland. That'll improve nutrient sediment filtering and consequently improve the water quality and flow into Lake Coeur d'Alene. Also improving waterfowl, fish, habitats, vegetative diversity. So our plan was to improve the hydrology of the wetland by redirecting channelized flow out of the existing ditch, kind of restoring a more natural stream system that would meander through the wetlands, and also some off-channel ponds to help retain water through the summer season. Also some mounded areas that would increase the diversity, the topographic diversity for increased vegetation and wildlife habitat. It all sounds great, but we needed help to do it. So in 2018, the BLM submitted a project proposal for the restoration of the Cougar Bay wetland to the Coeur d'Alene Basin Restoration Partnership. As many of you probably know, the Restoration Partnership is a collaborative effort by the Coeur d'Alene Basin trustees that include the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, the state of Idaho, and the U.S. Department of Interior and the Department of Agriculture. So these cooperators, as a result of numerous legal settlements, were able to obtain funds from the responsible parties to restore natural resources that were injured by the release of mining-related hazardous waste, the mining companies in the Silver Valley, into the Coeur d'Alene Basin. And so these settlement funds are managed by the Restoration Partnership, whose mission it is to help restore health, productivity, and diversity of the injured resources. So while testing revealed that Cougar Bay wetland was not directly contaminated by mine waste, the improvement of habitat and benefits to water quality in Lake Coeur d'Alene is in line with the mission and goals of the Restoration Partnership, and funding was awarded for the restoration of Cougar Bay wetland. So then we went out looking for, well, more partners. And we partnered with Ducks Unlimited to help design a restoration plan. So here's what we came up with. This was mainly created by Mike Stevenson, the BLM hydrologist, and Brian Heck from Ducks Unlimited. He's the wetlands restoration coordinator with them for the inland Intermountain West. So hopefully you can kind of see this, but the blue lines are the recreated stream channels. The purple little polygons there are the ponds, and the brown areas are the raised beds, which are mostly going to be created from the excavated materials from the stream channel and the ponds. There's a couple channels, nice meanders, some floodplains there to get the water spread out more, ponds to retain water, and get things out of the ditch. So before we wanted to move in with the big equipment, we needed to do a few things with small equipment. So this is our beginning of our treatments of the reed canary grass. So we needed to remove some of that vertical biomass that is really hard to spray through. So we mowed 15 acres with this thing. And the reed canary grass is not like you can take your garden lawnmower out there. It is tall, tough, and hard to get through. So following the mowing, we did some treatments with herbicides, aquatically approved herbicides, in the spring of 2021. So you can see we've kind of got all that high, tall grass knocked down so that we can get a nice regrowth that the herbicides can be absorbed much more readily. So this is all in preparation for the actual construction, which began in October of 2021. So this was timed to coincide with low water season and to minimize the impact from lake sediment, impact to the lake from potential sediments that be coming downstream and through the project area. After a competitive bid, the project contract was awarded to the LKE Corporation, which specialize in restoration of wetlands and wildlife and fish habitat. They were really good to work with. We were really pleased with their expertise, and they're willing to be flexible with our design plans. So right here, they're connecting into the old stream channel. So there's a bridge actually that I'm standing on taking the picture, but that channel essentially ended well, I don't know if it was the original channel, but it was the closest thing we had to original channel. But it ended about where those machines are starting. So they're just there beginning to construct the new stream channels. So we put in 2,300 feet of new stream channels with adjacent floodplains. So you can kind of see some of the effects of the reed canary grass treatment out there. It looks good, but unfortunately it's not really that easy to get rid of. Here's another view of a little further along in the stream channel creation process. Here you can see the floodplains on both sides. It's not a very deep channel. Cougar Bay or Cougar Creek doesn't carry a lot of water. The watershed is not that large. So we wanted to keep it small and shallow so that it would regularly overtop its banks and get out into it's a little floodplain, but it's a little bit of additional habitat. Plus, we were able to scrape the reed canary grass off of those floodplains, the reed canary grass sod. So you can kind of see in the background there's some mounds of excavated material. So those are going to become some of the raised mound beds for future planting. Then we started with the ponds, and more ponds, more raised beds out in the back, and then more ponds. So let's go back to the ponds, sorry. Again, the ponds, there for holding water longer into the summer season, increased habitat diversity, can help settle out some sediments, but mostly water retention and habitat for aquatic species. Oh, getting ahead of myself. Here we go. So, aerial view from a drone's footage during the 2/3 of the way through the probably construction process there. So you can see some of the channels meandering down, the beginnings of some of the ponds. And as I said, the reed canary grass sod was scraped off first and placed into the mounds. But we were careful to put that into the mounds first and then top that sod with with soil from deeper excavations that would have been below the sod surface. So the deeper ponds, we would take that material and cap the reed canary grass sod with it, because reed canary grass has a really aggressive root system that can, easily get through soil if it's, unless you bury it deep enough. So that was the goal there. So the mounds also provide a little bit of a drier site that can potentially help native species have a little bit more competitive chance against the reed canary grass. So reed canary grass doesn't like it too wet, where the cattails start to take over. Also doesn't like it too dry. So we were kind of trying to alter the system there, where it was kind of all the same level, all perfect for reed canary grass, and create more areas that were wetter, more areas that were drier, hopefully to help native vegetation have a competitive chance against the reed canary grass. So just as the fall rains came, we put the finishing touches on the construction phase of the project. And that happened just barely got the machines out of there as the fall rains came in. So the next phase was revegetation. So we did lots of woody species from container stock. We did cuttings, we did plugs and seed, and planting and planting and more planting. So roughly 1,500 willow cuttings. Willow cuttings were sourced from the Coeur d'Alene Tribe Willow Nursery, where they grow out native willows specifically for taking cuttings for restoration projects in the region. Huge help, great resource for willow. Also, we got some from the local Forest Service nursery here with the BLM. We're right next door, so it was super handy. We could run over there in the spring, take some cuttings off some of their willows, and be out at this site within just a few minutes. Also did a lot of Douglas spirea cuttings that were collected at the project site. And there you see a list of some of the herbaceous plugs, sedges and rushes that were put in, mostly in the floodplains along the side of the stream, the created stream channels. Here's some of the Douglas spirea cuttings. Those are Douglas spirea bushes, the brown just in the back off the side of the road. And so spring of 21, we were taking cuttings. That you can see our high-tech planting tool, which is just a battery-powered cordless drill with a long bit. We could drill down into the soil and then shove the cuttings down in. It worked really, really well. The soils out there were super friendly to drills and augering. We didn't find a single rock in the entire project area. And then here's one of the little plugs, an example of the 10 cubic inch plugs that we used that were the mostly rushes and sedges. But again, we could use a cordless drill with a slightly different bit, but drill a little hole and pop those things right into the floodplain. So our woody species list is here. So these woody 1 gallons, we get about 1,000 of those. A bunch of different riparian species, but also some upland species as well that were put on the raised mounds. So the majority of the container stock was sourced from Wildlife Habitat Nursery, which is down in Potlatch, Idaho, and they focus on native containerized herbaceous and woody plants for wetland and stream habitat restoration. And it's really important to get your source the plant material from local plant populations to get plants that are adapted to our local climate. Because a lot of these same species are pretty widespread around the Northwest, and a lot of the nursery stock that you can get is from Western Oregon and Western Washington. But getting the ones that are actually from our area and the source material is from the Intermountain Northwest, and as close to the project area as possible is really important to get those plants that are adapted to our local climate. So here's some of the early plantings of the thin leaf alder, which didn't require fencing. They're not really palatable to the deer and elk and moose that are actually fairly regular in the area. We didn't see them at all really during the day, other than the one moose, but almost every day we'd be in there and see signs, whether it was trails or scat. There's also beaver that have been coming into the area, and they were taking some of the bigger alders, but luckily alders resprout from the base and from most of this type of damage. We also got some deer rubbing on them that would break them off, but again, they just kind of start sprouting again. Oops. Some of the other species we were putting in were willows, dogwoods, and anything that might taste good to the deer were protected with fencing. We used a lot of the augers for the 1 gallon. You can see the auger on the right corner there of the picture, which was fantastic. You could really kind of motor through a lot of planting in a day. You'll also notice, so the channel where the wagon is sitting, that sandy channel, is dry. So we deliberately didn't fully connect the channels when they were new to the ditch and the Cougar Creek. We didn't want a high flow blowing out these areas before we could kind of get them stabilized with some of the vegetation. That was both with seed and with the plants. So when we got tired of running augers all day, we went to the big equipment and did some trench planting. That kind of sped things up a little bit. And then here's, just because it makes it a little bit easier to see how many pods they kind of run off into the distance there, pods of fencing. And we tried to do these smaller pods because mainly because it was easier to manage the fencing. 50-foot roll of fencing would create these decent little sized pods. It also gave room for the deer and the elk to get through it. Sometimes they wouldn't see the fence, especially at night. So you'd get them running into them, or if you had too big an area, they could jump over it. If you kind of keep these pods small enough, they don't want to. They're only 5-foot tall fences, so the deer can jump them, but if you keep them too small, they don't seem to want to jump inside these tiny little fenced off areas. And it's worked really well. Haven't had any. We had a couple of them we had to bend back into position after they've been run to, but none of them have been breached by any of the wildlife out there. We have had to put some wire cages around some things to keep the beaver off of them as well. They've been kind of coming in, which we kind of want the beaver in there, but you don't really want them eating all your brand new plants either. So outcomes and benefits. We've seen a significant recruitment of native species into the floodplain areas. Spirea, alder, creeping spikesbrush, cattails have all expanded beyond what we have planted, just from the native populations and into the floodplain area especially. But we've also seen, improvements to the hydrology, where we've got water starting to spread out into floodplain to reduce sedimentation, hopefully reducing some of the pollutants that might flow into the lake. And we've definitely seen, at least in some of our localized floodplain pond areas, a shift from invasive monocultures to a diverse native vegetation. We're still battling the reed canary grass in a good portion of the meadow. So that's going to be an ongoing issue, but we're kind of focusing on these areas that we've invested in the planting to try and at least keep it out of there and start working back from the edges and see if we can kind of beat the reed canary grass back, or at least keep it out of the areas that we've invested our time and money into with all these new new plants. So we've been able to create sustainable habitat for fish and waterfowl, mammals. We've seen quite a bit of waterfowl using the area. Seen muskrats in there, a lot of amphibians, as well as, like I said, some of the vegetation has come in on its own. We have hopefully linked the lake with Cougar Creek for some migration of fish species that might come through where they might not have been able to get through the channel before. But we've also got some things to do. Like I said, additional reed canary grass treatments. We still have to do some work on water management, trying to redirect some of the flow into the established stream channels now that we've got a fairly good start on keeping them stabilized. And then we're going to do some long-term monitoring and maintenance to help preserve the restored habitats. Still kind of working on that as we speak. And yeah, so we just want to thank you for your time today, and a special thanks to Mike Stevenson. So he was our BLM hydrologist who's since retired, but this was his brainchild, his project. I was there helping, but wouldn't have happened without Mike, and I just want to give him a lot of credit for that. So any questions? We could have some time, I think.
So far, we have one question from Sherry Gaines. She wants to know if it would be possible to get an attachment of the map that you showed at the beginning, like a PDF or
of the design map, the project design. Is that what?
Yes, that's what she says. Yep.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
If you want to email that to me, Doug, I can send it out when I send the follow-up email to everybody.
You bet. That's easy. So one thing I will say that we did not, there's a few ponds and things that we didn't get constructed that are on that plan design. Money's always gonna dictate how much work you can get done. So we had to save some for the vegetation as well. So it's not exactly what we built out there, but it's close.
And then Steve Palmer has a comment. He just says, looks beautiful and can't wait to look at it.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the trail system that's adjacent to it is, the trails don't go through the wetland, but they run right along the hillside adjacent to it, accessible from that parking lot off of Highway 95. And you can get some fairly nice views of it if you're interested in kind of taking a closer look. You can also walk out in the meadow, but the trails just don't go through there.
Angela wants to know what additional treatments for reed canary grass are anticipated.
Yeah, they'll probably do a little bit of hand pulling if they get into some of the pods, the vegetative pods, where it makes it really difficult to spray but unfortunately, most of the effective treatments, well, somewhat effective treatments are aquatic herbicides. And, because reed canary grass is a grass, the effective herbicides are typically non-selective herbicides. So it makes it difficult to treat in and amongst desirable species. So sometimes we can do a little bit of hand pulling, but it's got such a strong root system that it's also very difficult. But we will be kind of trying to, like I said, kind of treat especially the edges closest to where we have the plantings with the herbicides to try and keep it from expanding into those areas that we've put a lot of work into.
And Angelo still has his hand raised, so I might follow up with him to see if he has further questions. Caleb wants to know if there are any other projects like this that are ongoing or set to begin.
Um, as from the BLM perspective, we don't have any of these in the near term. We're looking at a few around the lake, but we don't have anything lined up for the near future.
And then Jennifer says, great presentation, Doug. What are the main waterfowl that you're seeing use the restored wetlands? And what is the typical BLM strategy for tackling the remaining and returning reed canary grass, which you already answered that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, so I'm a plant guy. I don't know the waterfowl all that well. I mean, other than that blue heron that you see in the picture. Um, you know, there's a lot of Canadian geese that hang out there in the spring, trying to, eating some of they will actually eat some of the reed canary grass when it's just the tiny little, nice green new shoots, but then they quickly get tired of that and head off. There are quite a few duck species, but I'm not going to try and guess what they are because I eat wrong. But yeah. So one other thing I didn't mention was in this picture, there's a snag in the background behind some of those willows. And that was actually installed by the contractors. They found it on the hillside and asked if they could plant it out there. So it gave a perch for when we do see the heron in it, sometimes osprey. We've had some bald eagles out there, but they've pretty much just been kind of moving through the area. But yeah, it was kind of a cool little addition to the project.
Yeah, that's neat to think about. So we still have quite a few questions actually. Anna wants to know if there have been any studies on how fish populations are responding to the habitat changes. And thanks you for doing this work.
No, we haven't done any of that. And again, like I said, I'm a plant guy, and I know that West Slope cutthroat trout have been found in Cougar Creek, so we expect that might get more use from them. Bull trout, there's not a lot of good data on where they are out of the lake. Obviously, the lake is considered a habitat for bull trout. We did an environmental assessment that discussed some of the expected impacts from the project on things including fish species. So I do have that is available as well, but it's not an actual study of what happened post project. It was more of, those are intended to be um, more estimations of the impacts and analysis of the current situations. I'm sorry, there was a second part to that question.
Oh, made it go away too fast. I think it was just thank you for doing this work. And then the next one, Wanda wants to know if you're willing to share the total crop cost for the project.
Right. So the contract, I knew this was right before this. Don't quote me on it, but I want to say that the contract with the LKE was, I believe, 180,000, and then we had additional costs for treatments and vegetation and fencing, but most of the planting was done either by internal BLM. We did have some volunteers come out and help us some as well, so we tried to keep the costs as low as we could by trying to leverage some of that in-house muscle to get it done. But yeah.
Okay, 3 more questions. What was the quantitative before and after monitoring done on the creek? So i.e. TSS nutrients to quantify the restoration in terms of water quality.
So that was Mr. Stevenson's role when he was here. He did some of that beforehand, and we haven't really started doing it since he's retired. So we're still working on getting that kind of back up and running, but been focusing on some of the revegetation efforts first. And that those are important questions and important things to consider. But we're getting there. We were going to get there, but unfortunately, I don't have those answers yet.
When, so this is my question for you, Doug. This project just wrapped up fairly recently, right? What was the timeline for when you finalized like sending the stream through and everything?
Yeah, well, we still haven't completely finished connecting the stream back. There's still some, but I think this summer is likely where we're going to kind of do the final touches of changing the water flows. Now that we've got the vegetation fairly well established, we're going to do that this summer, and then we'll be done probably by the end of the summer. There's still going to be some ongoing maintenance. The reed canary grass thing is never going to go away, but that'll just have to happen, as a regular, ongoing, forever, likely.
We have more questions, lots of questions with this presentation, so that's great. How much natural regeneration of native species did you observe? And which species are thriving? Where did this occur?
Yeah. The majority of the native regeneration we were seeing were some of those little edge of the floodplain area where the reed canary grass sod had gotten scraped off the sides. So especially down lower where areas where we had more water entering those little floodplains were easily the areas where we saw the most native recruitment of plants. The majority of those were rushes. There's a daggerleaf rush that was everywhere. Also saw cattails kind of coming up. One of the photos, you could kind of see them sort of floating in the channel there. We've also seen, so actually in this picture, there were a lot of cattails down here lower to, this is sort of the lowest end of the project area. But as the water has kind of spread out through there and stayed wet longer, the cattails have actually started encroaching on the reed canary grass and moving further up into the wetland. Yeah, Douglas spirea and is probably the other one that we've seen the most of, probably because there are little pockets of it upstream, quite a few, as well as alder, that have been sending seed downstream, and then they'll land in those little floodplains, and we're getting quite a bit of those as well. I mean, they're still the little guys, but they're there.
Okay. Marianne Stoll wants to know, is there any impact on bay or lake water quality expected from this restoration?
Well,
Oh,
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I think we've covered that a little bit. She has a follow-up too. That covers her curiosity, she said, and the brief.
Yeah, I mean, right. I think we've said that just by spreading the water out, you're going to reduce sediments that are coming through. They'll settle out quicker. The longer you can keep the water in there, in the ponds, in the floodplains, you can filter out some of the, if there's nitrogen and phosphorus from upstream sources, you can likely get some of that out. So we expect to see some benefits to the water in the bay. You know, at least the water entering the bay, but how much of that and how it'll affect the bay as a whole, you know, I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah.
Okay. And then Rebecca Stevens just has some comments to add to your statements. She said to answer Wanda's question, the restoration project contributed to that 282,000. And then, but as you mentioned, the BLM contributed a lot of matching with labor and volunteers. So.
Thanks, Rebecca.
And final question, Caleb wants to know if the proximity of the wetland is a significant catalyst in making the project happen, visible and potential for recreation. Also, are there plans for funding long-term management of the wetlands?
I would say that the proximity certainly was probably a factor in all of that, including the acquisition of the property in the original, the original acquisition by the Nature Conservancy was likely impacted by the location and the proximity to Coeur d'Alene, as well as likely the award, the contract, or the award for funding from the Restoration Partnership is a nice. It's easy for people to get out there and see what can be done, and it can be useful in that regard as well.
Right, I think that might be it for questions. Rebecca says, thanks, Doug. Thanks, great job. If no one has any more questions, I think we'll wrap this up. And thank you, Doug, for presenting today. It's always nice to hear about something that everybody can go out and see for themselves. And thank you for everyone for attending. Next month, we will have Susan Sheet with the North Kootenai Water Sewer District, who will present on water smart programming.